Everybody out there, welcome to this episode of the Skirball tapes. And as you know, our overarching theme is radical imaginations. Our guest is Elaine Pagels, this brilliant, fearless, and humane historian of religion. And she addresses deliberately fundamental questions about faith, belief, religious institutions, and very importantly, how we write their history. She writes for audiences inside and outside of the academy. I just want to give you one sign of her exceptional and welcome creativity. There, there are her six of her books. That's not all of them. That's only six of her books. And one will be published very shortly. So, Elaine, thank you so much for being here. I'm so pleased. We've known each other for a long time, and I've admired you with such fervency. Now, as you know, our overarching theme is radical imagination. And you're remarkable as a much acclaimed historian of early Christianity. But the word imagination flows through your books.
It does.
Yeah. And you talk about early Christianity as this wild and diverse period, and you bring to life men and women of radical imagination in all their diversity. And I have to tell you, I fell in love with some of your characters. I really fell in love with Julian, and I fell out of love with others of your characters.
Oh, it happens to me all the time.
Right. For Julian, I can have a constant love for Julian.
And a constant out of love with Augustine.
Yes, I have fallen out of love, and I think falling out of love with Augustine may be permanent, although I will always speak of him with respect. And who are the people she's bringing to life in a daring and new way? They're called the Gnostics. And here is my, Elaine, forgive me, here is my poster. Not so people will know what we're talking about. Gnostics, and gnosis, and the word related to it that we'll get to, recognition. Recognition. So people, here we go. Elaine, let's start with two fundamental words that will be so much a part of our conversation. What do we mean by imagination? It's more than just seeing tulips in the sky, isn't it? What is this human capacity that you find in places that you find in such diverse places? What is it? What do you mean when you say someone is imaginative or a movement is imaginative?
Well, that's a great question. And I want to thank you because really starting the conference you did at Barnard when we first met has helped me enormously in understanding what I was doing.
Right.
That word imagination, I mean, what is religion about? I mean, I asked a friend of mine who is a well-known black theologian, James Cone, and he said, if people say, what is theology? He'd say, it's imagination. What else could it be? I mean,
I
we
can hear him say that.
created.
Yeah,
What?
I can just hear him say that.
Did you meet him when he was teaching at Barnard?
Yes.
That's
Or
when
at other places, yeah.
that's when I met him, and we were friends until the day he died, which wasn't long ago. But yes, it is the way we transform the reality we see into realities that are not visible, usually, or immediately visible. and how we have relationships with beings that may not be visible as well. Um, that takes imagination, as we do in novels and we do in poems, we do in dreams, but also it happens in religious traditions. Um, and it really is about how we have and engage relationships with
And
ourselves and other beings.
and you say that if we're imaginative, not stupidly imaginative, but opening ourselves up, you say that it will have this effect on human relationships. We enter into new relationships with others
Right.
and therefore with ourselves.
Well, it what we imagine can transform us. You know, if a person gets deeply depressed and starts imagining terrible darkness everywhere, you know, it can change one's character, one's the way we look, the way we feel, how we act, everything.
And you say that if we have new relationships, imaginative relationships, you use the words equanimity and joy.
Well, that's the best the best possible outcome, I think.
But I want you um, to lay to rest a canard about scientists because they too have great imagination, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the best ones really do. Um, I was lucky enough to marry one like that. And, you know, if you can imagine outer space, or well, actually, when we first met, um, he said, why do you do religion? Why don't you do something that has impact in the real world? And I said, why do you do elementary particles? I mean, elementary particles have to be imagined too, because they're quite invisible. Physics is about how you envision space and outer space and our relationship to it. And the best scientists always come up with different ways of seeing, seeing internally often, because it's often what we can't see physically.
So I love the way you say that imagination is not just limited to poems we read. It is a part of the arts, but it is a part of all the disciplines, and it is a part of living a full life. And the next major word is this. What is a what is a Gnostic? What what is Gnosticism? What
Ah,
what I've fallen in love with them thanks to you. But if I were a Gnostic, I would be very different from other Gnostics. But what would I be like?
well, in the earliest Christian movement, some people were called Christian Gnostics, which meant it wasn't just that they thought of having faith in something they can't see, or believed in a bunch of things, but they felt they had existential knowledge. They knew something different about the world, about themselves, about everything. And it's much better expressed in Greek and most other languages than it is in English, because Gnostic means someone who knows. But this is not mental knowing. In Greek, you have a word that means knowing in your mind, and that word is idein, which means to see, literally. So if you say cat, you sort of see it in your mind. That's mental cognitive knowledge. But gnosis is, as I would say, knowledge of the heart. It's do you know who you are? Do you know God? Do you know that person? This is recognition, and that's why the word recognize is a very different kind of word. So in French, you know, you have connaître, which and savoir as recognition and mental knowing, or kennen and wissen in German, or conocer and saber in Spanish. These languages all recognize that there are different kinds of knowing. This is knowledge of the heart, and it's not about what you believe. These are not Christians who say, I believe in this and this and this. They say, I know, I recognize, I feel, I experience a different presence.
And it's part of the radicalism, and we'll get to this later. But right for now, it's part of the radicalism saying, I seek in my heart and
Yeah.
through my heart, not through being told
Or my mind
or my
so
mind.
much. It's not the mental knowing.
So enlightenment means not the neurons flaring up in our cognitive networks, but enlightenment means having a certain light come into your heart.
Yes, it could be that illumination. I mean, if you think about Buddhist teaching or Hindu teaching, illumination is not a cognitive process so much. It's a kind of quality of being.
Yes, a certain openness.
Yes, and a capacity for transformation.
Oh, that's a capacity for daring to be other than one is at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. The conviction that we are always at every moment transforming. This is what one of the great fathers of the church, Origen, said. He said, you cannot be static. It's impossible. You are always in motion every second. You are either moving, he thought, in one direction or the other. Either you're moving toward union with others and with all being and the source of all being, or you're moving away into isolation and a kind of um, a kind of nothingness, and a kind of numb.
Oh, 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 oh.
So you can't stand still internally in any way. We're always moving toward one another or away.
That's beautiful. So here we have the imagination linked to a way of being in the world that seeks the divine. And these are two central things that we will be talking about. But you, as a young scholar, take as your difficult subject the relations of early Christianity to the Gnosticism of the period. By the way, just could you tilt your screen a little so we can see
This way?
other direction, I think. Yes, so we can see the top of your head as well.
Yeah. Is that better?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Uh,
Yes. I mean, Gnosticism became a derogatory term in the 19th century because it was used for heretics by the Christians who called themselves Orthodox. And
and
I always
Orthodox meant,
I always love the term Orthodox. It means straight thinking. Orthodox.
no puns intended, right?
Well, there are. And I always think of orthodontia, it's about
Yeah.
straight teeth. Well, this is about thinking straight. And the Orthodox called them that. And they called these other people who weren't thinking the way they were um, heretics. Now, the term heretic means choice. And choice is something that the bishops thought the leaders of the church, when they began to organize communities, didn't think was a good thing for everyone else to have. You should not think what you think. You should not choose. You should listen to what we say. And the so-called Gnostics were people who didn't like that view any more than you or I do.
I see. So I can see the struggle. I see the struggle now. And I want the audience to know even more about your work, which about Gnosticism and early Christianity, its radicalism and what it means to our imagination. But can we go back? Because the young Elaine Pagels is quite a creature. The young Elaine Pagels grew up in Palo Alto, California. And I was intrigued as I read your book that who taught you love? It wasn't your mother or your father, was it? That who
Not
taught you
really.
who
It was
taught you what it meant to be loved?
my
Such a joy.
grandparents
Oh.
and maybe my dog
Right.
and some very good friends.
Because you also write about love in religion. And so it intrigued me. Where did you learn what love might mean? And it came from your grandfather had an orchard, didn't he?
Oh, yes. My grandparents were just warm and generous people. They came from Holland originally when they were very young, and they moved to California, and they had a huge orchard with all kinds of fruit and actually dogs and cats and children. Um, and they had a lot of fun with each other. And that was a joyful place to be.
Oh, that's good. So love was associated with joy and with growth and with
Yes.
many. That's beautiful. But you're 15 years old and you go to the so-called Cow Palace in San Francisco. And could we please show the slide of one of the most charismatic men of the 20th century, the Reverend Billy
Billy
Graham?
Graham, and he was a young, charismatic preacher. First of all, it's important that I was brought up in a family that was, by background, they would say they were Christian, but my father had rejected it all for science. He said, Darwin is right, religion is useless and meaningless. Freud, he would have agreed. Um, it's an illusion that we need to get rid of. And so my parents were quite horrified when, as an adolescent, I went up with some friends to San Francisco to hear Billy Graham. I didn't actually know who he was. But this huge stadium was full of 60,000 people, and there was an enormous choir, maybe 4,000 people singing. And he was preaching and saying what he would say would sound ridiculous to academics, and it did. He was calling America a sinful nation. My grandparents would have been shocked by that too, because we thought America was the standard of everything good. But he was talking about slavery and segregation supported by the Bible. He was talking about a country that worshiped science and was ignorant of the fact that it had created nuclear weapons that had killed over 100,000 people.
This is Billy Graham.
Yes, he was talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I thought, wait a minute. My family thought science was the highest of all things, but the fact that it had become an instrument of murder had
So you
never
became
occurred to me.
so you became
And I was so
opened up your
startled by that.
imagination
He
and
said,
you became a born again Christian.
yes, and then he talked about how you could be born again and you could have a new life and a new family and and God would love you whoever you are. And I thought, hey, I'm 14. Yes, I want out of this family. I want that. I want to be in a much bigger world. And so I just was overwhelmed with emotion. And I went up and was born again with thousands of people singing and praying and shouting and cheering. It was great. And I
Oh,
loved it I thought,
well,
wonderful. It opened up the sky.
isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? And at the same time, you're this brilliant kid and you're running around with a lot of renegades.
Yes.
You're going to Bible study and running around with these renegades. Could please show a picture of one of those renegades? Now, who is that renegade that you were
That
hanging?
was Jerry Garcia. as
Yeah.
we knew him, when he was 18. He'd just come out of the army. Or maybe he was about 20 then. He was running around Palo Alto playing guitar, giving guitar lessons, 12-string guitar, amazing musician. And we had some other sketchy people around. Um, and they were a lot of fun too.
Sounds like it. But you leave the born again evangelical Christianity. Two things seem to happen with you very close in time. You leave evangelical Christianity, then you go to college, and then you choose to go to graduate school in the history of religion.
Yeah.
What what was the cause of your deconversion? If I can
Well,
use
what happened was there was an automobile accident uh, in which uh, friends coming back from a party, the car rolled over, and my closest friend in the car then was killed. He was 16, high school friend. And Jerry Garcia was in the car and his friend Ellen Trist, and they survived. Jerry was thrown out the front windshield and Ellen was thrown out the other side, and they survived because the car rolled over on our friend Paul. And we were all in shock. I wasn't in the car, but um, I went back to the evangelical church and I said, my friend just died. He's 16 years old, this very vibrant, intense guy who had quit high school because he was a painter. He didn't want anything to do with anything except painting. And they said, well, that's awful. Was he born again? And I said, no, he was Jewish. And they said, well, then he's in hell.
yeah,
And when I heard that, I just felt devastated. I thought, wasn't Jesus Jewish? What are you talking about?
Jesus was Jewish. Yes,
Well, of course he was Jewish.
he was a rabbi.
But I couldn't speak. I was so
Of
shocked.
course, of course.
And I never went back. I just went off to New York actually to study dance and forget the whole thing.
And then you have an enormous gift for languages. You know Hebrew, Coptic, which not everybody knows, Latin, Greek, French, German, Italian. You're enormously learned. Obviously, this brilliant young woman. You apply to 5 graduate programs. You're admitted to all 5, and you choose to go to Cambridge and to study as a graduate student, a very male-dominated field, history of
entirely,
religion.
entirely male dominated.
And what do you find in Cambridge?
Well, you see, that graduate program, I chose it because it was secular. It wasn't a church school. It wasn't a
Yeah.
religious school. I didn't think I'd get brainwashed. But you could study Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or Judaism or Christianity. And I liked Buddhism too, but I thought Christianity is my problem. So I was trying to figure out what was it 4 or 5 years ago that struck me so deeply about about this religious conversion, when I just felt like I discovered the reality of God and Satan and my brothers and sisters in Christ, this whole scenario, God and Satan contending up there in heaven. I mean, I was just living in that imagination, right? In that
Yeah.
world. And I thought, could it have been Buddhism? Could it have been Judaism or Hinduism? How did Christianity start anyway? And so there we began to look at the earliest sources, the ones in the New Testament. But suddenly we we had an enormous surprise that we were given the privilege, the graduate students and faculty at Harvard, to translate 52 texts that had been found some years before, but weren't translated.
Could I just
Which,
show Elaine, forgive me, could I just show a visual of
yes,
what those texts looked
yes,
like when they were discovered? before they went into your professor's filing cabinet?
Yes, they were 2,000 years old. They'd been found in Egypt, carefully hidden in a cave. And they were a sacred library. They had among them a number of texts that are called Gospels, the Gospel according to Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Truth, and the Gospel of Mary was found later, Mary Magdalene. But there were also Jewish texts and Greek and Egyptian sacred texts as well. And we didn't know what they were, so we called them Gnostic Gospels, but many of them aren't. That was just what struck us first. So we started to translate these texts. This is the first time, Kate, that anyone had ever claimed to find authentic teachings of Jesus
It's
since
so
2,000
exciting.
years before.
And they are hidden in various museums or filing cabinets, and you are helping to bring them to light.
Yes, we were able to translate the whole find, and there had been some translations before, but we were able to translate the whole collection. It took about 30 years, actually. But and we didn't know what we would find. My teacher, Krista Stendhal, said, these texts are weird, you know. You have to be careful because these are rejected,
Indeed.
these are heresy.
Well, so there you are, translating them. But tell us just a little bit. Jesus was born, he died,
Right?
and the subsequent 3 to 4 centuries are centuries, are they not, of enormous struggle as to what will emerge from these various new ways of understanding the world and the divine? The Roman Empire is not a very nice oppressor. It's not a very nice governor. In fact, it's a terrible governor of the Middle East.
Yes.
And there's a new religion. Let's call it the Spartacus. I don't think it's Spartacus myth, but to be an early Christian is to be a criminal, to be tortured, to be executed, right?
Yes, because not not supporting the gods of the Roman world meant that you were some kind of alien, that you were hostile to the order of politics and society, and you were probably a criminal, probably a revolutionary against Roman power. And the Roman Empire did not tolerate anyone uh, challenging its power.
But then, as I understand it, in this welter of thought and ideas, there's these huge struggles. And I have a Bishop of Lyon. Can we see the picture of him, please?
Irenaeus.
Irenaeus. I've mispronounced it, no doubt.
No, you're perfectly right. That's Holy Irenaeus is what it says there. Because he's one of the fathers of the church. You see, he's very important. Um,
And he was very much against the what we now
he
call
he
Gnostic.
he was very hostile to people who didn't understand Christianity as he taught it. And the way he taught it was from the Gospels that now are new in the New Testament: Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. But he also knew there were other Gospels that claimed to give you advanced level teaching, secret teaching of Jesus, and not public teaching as the Gospels of the New Testament do. And the trouble with secret teaching is you can't really check whether it's true or not. And actually, we can't tell in any of the Gospels. But Irenaeus wanted people to think in one way. He said, we have to think, we have to become Orthodox Christians, straight thinking Christians. And the way we do that is we follow the New Testament Gospels that say Jesus is the Son of God, believe in Jesus and be saved, and join the church. And these other texts are different.
Or they become banned books, do they not? These other texts become banned books. of the time.
Yes, he said they were diabolical. They were created by the devil to confuse us, and people uh, who followed them were simply deluded fools and really very dangerous.
And he accused them of reading your books. I learned that he accused what we now call the Gnostics of having too much imagination.
Yes, yes, and also thinking they knew more than other people, because what they claimed, if the Gospels in the New Testament teach what Jesus taught on the hillsides of Galilee to thousands of people, these allegedly he spoke secretly to certain disciples that he chose. The Gospel of Thomas is not a list of stories like the New Testament. It's a list of sayings. It says, these are the secret teachings of the living Jesus. And Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down. And so he then speaks mysteries. Now, people have argued, did Jesus have secret teaching? And Irenaeus said, absolutely not. Couldn't have. No, it's all public teaching. Any claim to secret teaching is garbage. But Mark's gospel in chapter 4 says that when Jesus was alone with his disciples, he spoke to them and said, to you alone
Oh,
is given the mystery of the kingdom of God. But to
oh,
people
oh.
out there, it's all parables. I just tell them parables so that they won't understand anything else.
It's such a struggle. It's such a struggle. And then the Emperor Constantine comes, converts to Christianity, and the Orthodox become the established church, right?
Yes, because they can become the emperor's collaborators in ruling the empire. And they do. So you find that you have an empire suddenly with Constantine. It's such a shock. Instead of the gods of Greece and Rome, Roma and Juno and Apollo and the whole crowd of
Athena. Yeah.
Greek gods, you had only the one God and Christ, and the emperor claimed to be his representative on earth. So the empire is now Christian, but Orthodox. And everyone who's not Orthodox is in outer darkness, I
Is
mean,
a heretic, right?
spiritually, but also excluded from privileges in the empire, is sent out, um, is considered a non-person.
It's quite scary to me, actually. But I'm still thinking of this brilliant scholar, Elaine Pagels, this young graduate student who was helping to bring these newly discovered 2,000-year-old texts to life. And then it is 1979, late 70s. You deliver a lecture that becomes a book called The Gnostic Gospels. It has 6 chapters, and there's one, the third, that is particularly, I mean, you shake, all of the book shakes people up. But the third chapter, God the Father, God the Mother, and what had you discovered about early Christianity through these texts?
Well, in these secret texts, not in the Orthodox ones, the Gospels of the New Testament speak of God as Father always, and
Yeah.
only masculine. And he certainly doesn't have a feminine partner like all the other gods of the ancient Near East, whether they're Egyptian or Greek or Roman. They all have partners, but the God of Israel is only one and is a masculine God. But in these secret texts, they speak of God. They say, if you're going to use an anthropomorphic image, then you also use the feminine image of mother. And that comes from understanding the Holy Spirit in Hebrew as ruach, which is a feminine word in Hebrew, or chokhmah, also a feminine word meaning wisdom. So it says in the beginning, Genesis starts, in the beginning, a Ruach Elohim came over the deep waters, a spirit from God, a wind from God. And the spirit from God is a feminine power in, in, in Hebrew language. So it was actually at the women's conference at Barnard. I was asked, well, what do we know about women in the early church? And I said what I learned at Harvard. I said, well, nothing. We know nothing about women. And that's what they told me. But when you look at the secret gospels, there were women disciples very active. And the heavenly beings also were feminine beings, the Heavenly Mother, the Holy Spirit, and the power of divine wisdom. And they become beings. And I was quoting to them from the book of Isaiah, where the Lord says, I am a jealous God. You shall have no gods. There are no gods ahead of me. And his mother speaks down from above and says, do not tell lies, Yaldabaoth. Do not tell lies. And thousands of women started to laugh. I mean, we were all laughing. And she, wait, and he doesn't know anything, she says. And she tells him, the mother tells him off, as this creator God who thinks he's the only one, is quite ignorant of the powers above him. And when we were all laughing like that, I realized, oh yes, this means something socially as well. This language talks about male domination over women, obviously.
Mhm.
And it's quite funny that the God of Israel is now being chastised by his mother, who's pointing a finger at him and said, now stop that right now. and 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 then I thought, wait a minute, what happened there? So I went to one of our teachers and I said, what does it mean that there's all these feminine beings? And he said, how should I know? And I thought, why did I ask a Jesuit? You know? It was actually women who became interested in these secret texts because they were talking in a very different way, different imagination.
It's the response. As I say, you're a young scholar, you're a non-tenured assistant professor,
That's right.
and you publish the Gnostic Gospels. And what is the response?
Well, guess what? I mean,
Guess what? Yeah.
I was a first-time writer for, and I mean, out of the academic scene, and I got the front page of the Sunday Times review. And it was written. The problem is, it was written by a Catholic priest who taught at Union Seminary, who basically said, this Gospels, these were rubbish in the first century. They're still rubbish, and saying anything else is deceiving the public. So this was my review in the New York Times. I mean, he didn't say everything negative, but about the text, he said, this is all garbage. Just don't believe a word of it.
Well, I think opinion has changed. But one thing that I so respect, and I really, before we just have a few minutes left, but I so encourage people because in every one of her books, you take up a fundamental question. You once said, it's the fundamental questions I want. Here,
Yeah.
the myth of the Garden of Eden and the serpent, and there are many serpents.
And it's about sexuality and politics and how they, well, we were talking then about the personal and the political.
Yeah.
And this is a recognition of how sexual attitudes got shaped by these stories in the Hebrew Bible.
And the origin of Satan. I mean, isn't Satan just an a kind of ornery, mischievous angel who becomes the
Well,
demonic force?
I didn't know what to think of Satan, but I thought it was just a mythical character and kind of comic in a way,
Yeah.
horns and a tail. And then I realized that in the New Testament, the figure of Satan becomes a way of characterizing the Jewish people. And that really, I was dumbfounded because I hadn't even seen that it was there.
So, so the origins of Christianity, to oversimplify, are Jewish. Jesus is a rabbi.
Of course.
And then is Orthodoxy, which of course is complicated. I don't mean to demean anything. As Orthodox Christianity is shaped, Satan is associated with the Jews, and the Jews become Christ killers. Is it
That's a
sort of?
late stage of the Christian movement. I mean, late by my standards, it's third. It actually happens in the first century. And when I gave a talk about this at NYU at the time that book was published, and someone came up to me, someone spoke afterwards at the discussion and said, my family were Jews in Eastern Europe. And after Easter, Christians would come out of churches and hunt for Jews, and the Jews would hide. I had no idea. I was so naive. But there's a one of my colleagues at Princeton was Toni Morrison, and she read this and she said, Elaine, isn't Christianity all about love? She was raised Catholic. I said, well, at its best, it is. But there's an undercurrent of hatred in it. And that allows for what becomes Christian anti-Semitism centuries later when Jews are pursued and marginalized and hemmed in on every side in
Yeah.
so-called Christian Europe.
But you don't stop. My favorite, the gospel, secret gospel of Thomas. You keep going, Revelations.
Oh,
Oh,
that one, Kate, is because when none of us could stop the war in Iraq, when none of us could stop George Bush from going into a war in Iraq, when the enemy was in Afghanistan, too hard to get at, but there was oil in Iraq, you know the whole deal.
yeah.
I thought, how is it that he dared use the book of Revelation to sell his war to his base? He did. He did in his speeches by giving clues from the books of Revelation. I didn't even know at the time. Shock and awe was comes straight out of the book of Revelation. It's a claim that American bombs are bringing justice to the evildoers of the world. And that's what Bush wanted us to see. And people who knew the book of Revelation understood the language. So I wrote that trying to figure that out.
But also in the book you show there, it's called Revelations
Yes.
because you show in these once secret texts that there were other ways of seeing the apocalypse.
Well, that revelations can be yours, a very
Yes,
deeply personal experience that brings you into a new understanding of everything.
yes. It
And
could,
that's
yes,
what these texts are about. Yes.
very
There's a
different.
beauty in them.
Not, and then because there's two more questions I need, but I do so, though this is, forgive me for causing pain, a beautiful book
Thank you.
called Why Religion,
Mhm.
where you have gone through what you call unimaginable grief, the death of a son, a small son, Mark, at the age of 6. You and Heinz Pagel adopt two children. They're babies. He is killed in a mountain climbing accident.
Yeah.
And you must then, with great courage, you have, it's financially precarious. The children are babies.
Yeah.
You feel scalded by grief and you work your way out
Yeah.
with it. Still, you have a religion. You do not abandon the sense of the possibility of worlds beyond us and the ethics. And then there is the moment where you recognize that your heart is healed. Can we please show the Harvard honorary degree celebration?
Oh, that was a lovely scene. Yes.
In me, is it we I think we have a slide of that.
I wanted to write not about, and there was Oprah Winfrey right in the middle.
Right. And there you are. You're sort of, as I look at it, you're at the top. But it's a beautiful scene as you describe it because you say, I have met the tests. My children are growing up.
Yeah.
I have met the tests. But you also give us a sense of the church, the actual church that you now know. Could I just read this passage? And then if
Good.
I'm sure you have it memorized and you can pick up an actual church, help me to church of the heavenly rest. Help me to realize much that I love, key, about religious tradition and Christianity in particular, including how powerfully these may affect us and perhaps even transform us. Key
Yes.
words, love, transformation. And at the same time, my research helped clarify what I cannot love. The tendency to identify Christianity with a single authorized set of beliefs. However, these actually vary from church to church, coupled with the conviction that Christian belief alone offers access to God. It's a very spacious and imaginative vision. And again, the key words, at least to me, love, what I cannot love, transformation,
Yes, I wrote that
multiplicity.
book 30 years after my husband and my child died. I could, because that was like a black hole in my life. And but much later, um, I discovered that it was possible to go on and have a wonderful life in spite of things that happen, and that other people have worse things happen, things that are caused by violence, for example. But that that it's possible to be happy again and experience joy is wonderful.
I this it is it's a book of elegance and beauty, and you never lose your and here I so appreciate it. You never lose your scholarly and historical rigor. I would pose three questions and ask before we conclude which one you think we should talk about now. One question is the role of faith in American liberation struggles. I've been reading Talia Miles's book about Harriet Tubman called Night Flyer and wonder about that. Second is Christian nationalism,
Mhm.
as we are experiencing it today. And the third, we can't ignore this, even if we only have a sense to do it. You've got a book coming out. I have pre-ordered it, but I haven't been able to read it. So, do you want to speak very quickly about each of these questions? But we have to have a sense about the book that's coming out. And then,
Yes.
yeah,
First, what you say about faith, I mean, I'm not primarily, I mean, I'm primarily focused on Christianity just because that's how I grew up.
yeah,
But 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 this capacity for spiritual experience goes in every direction. People who find that in nature, in art, in music, um, in other traditions. So I think less of faith in things or belief. I'm not interested in belief, but in how we encounter our lives and how we imagine them and how we transform, as you said.
the
Christian
knowledge. Yeah.
Christian nationalism is a new kind of heresy. Um, it has nothing to do with this country, really. As George Washington understood, this is not a Christian country. It should not be. It never was. It wasn't meant to be. And Christianity allied with national political interests in that narrow way, I think is really terribly unfortunate. it's being used today in a way that's very concerning.
And
It
what is
does,
it?
but there are people who have great courage. I think of Martin Luther King Jr. I thought of Alex Navalny, who was a Christian and able to survive what he did because of his faith, he said, and others as well. Nelson Mandela. A lot of scholars don't talk about that, but an African scholar at Princeton says this was the foundation of his capacity to survive and resist evil and transform a country in the way that he did.
And your next, what next from?
This book, I kept thinking, well, I want to put the New Testament Gospels in conversation with the secret Gospels and find out what was going on. What do we know about Jesus and what don't we know? And that's most of it. And furthermore, why do we care? Why do those stories become templates for people's lives? So in this book, I look at how people convert today, looking at anthropologists, about 8 different accounts, how certain groups in Madagascar and Patagonia and the Philippines and India, Southern California are converted to Christianity and what appeals to them. You talk about liberation, certainly that's been a powerful force as well. But also how painters and poets and filmmakers use the stories of Jesus to articulate what the messages they have to convey. And they do this in amazing ways.
What is the title of the book?
It's called Miracles and Wonder, the historical mystery of Jesus. And what surprised me is that I thought I was more interested in the teachings of Jesus, which I think are powerful teachings of how we treat people. But this time I got interested in the miracles because I realized that there's a pattern in the Hebrew Bible and also a pattern in the New Testament and the secret Gospels. They start in a world that we live in, where people are enslaved and oppressed and suffering and in pain and dying in cruel and horrible ways. And they end in hope. The slaves are freed. They come out of Egypt. They have their own country. They have their own kingdom. The Daniel in the lion's den comes out unharmed. Jonah comes out of the whale. Jesus is horribly tortured and executed in a humiliating and horrendous way, and then comes back. The stories end in hope. And the way they do is they model a way that any way that we find ourselves in deep distress might open up into hope. And I think that's something we need to know, because I wanted to know, how do we live a long life if we're lucky and not despair?
Oh, oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. I look forward to it so much. I want the last word because the last word is going to be a statement of such gratitude to you for your scholarship, for your imagination, for your life. But before I claim the last word of gratitude, would you read just a little bit from a poem that runs through your books when you reference, especially when you're talking about sex and gender in early Christianity? Isn't it called Thunder, a Complete Mind?
Yes, thunder. And thunder in Greek is also a feminine word, bronte. Actually, the Bronte sisters would have
Bronte.
liked that, bronte. Bronte teleos. It means complete consciousness. And here in this is a poem that is probably sung and danced. It's written in the form of a poem to the goddess Isis. And yet it encompasses more than Isis. It's a divine energy that comes forth from all power and is articulated in feminine form. And unlike the views of women, which typically in throughout history have been either the bad woman, associated usually with sexual aberrations of some sort, or the good woman. This is a powerful feminine energy who encompasses all of that. She says, I am sent forth from the power. I am the first and the last. I am honored and I am scorned. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the barren one and one who has many sons. I am the bride and the bridegroom. And I am my husband who gave birth to me. That's Adam giving birth to Eve. I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband. This power speaks. She encompasses everything. She says, I am knowledge and I am ignorance. I am shame and boldness. I am shameless. I'm ashamed. I am strength and I am fear. I am war and peace. Listen to me. Do not forget me. And it
Oh,
goes on. She encompasses all being in the language of Isis, in the language of Greek goddesses, in the language of Eve, in the language of the Holy Spirit in Hebrew. And this poem was loved so much by women. It's featured in a film called Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash, but also Toni Morrison read it and created from it many poems, which she published in a self-published book, a beautiful book. She simply took thunder as her own, and illustrated it by the artist Kara Walker. And
oh, yes,
we have it now in the library. I'm going to go see it this week. So if you come to Princeton, I'll show you Tony's book.
right. In Bronte. Bronte is not just Charlotte and Anne.
And it's the wholeness of this feminine energy that's celebrated in this glorious poem.
Elaine, thank you. I mean, thank you for your brilliance and thank you for being this brilliant, fearless, and humane historian of religion. Thank you for being a prophet who never forgets realities. Thank you for being with us. It has been my, ah, you have instructed us, you have delighted us, you have been the extraordinary figure you are in contemporary thought. So, my gratitude to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
May the thunder roll.
It does, I'm sure. Thank you, Kate. It's such a joy to see you and talk with you. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Goodbye for now. Goodbye for now.